At the beginning of the year, I was planning to do a Arcanorium course on cold reading, and I came across on YouTube a very good video about cold reading, and it was Richard Dawkins interviewing Derren for about 40 minutes on the subject. So I was able to recommend this, but I had to give a sort of health warning. Because the trouble is, it turned out that this video, for all the good content in it and all the interesting questions raised, was actually part of a moral crusade. It was recorded for a television documentary called The Enemies of Reason. And it was actually an attack on psychics and clairvoyance. Now, the trouble with the crusade is that usually it would start off with very good intentions, but ends up with an awful lot of collateral damage. What could be more noble than to set out against the enemies of Christendom? And yet, what usually happens at a crusade is you end up ransacking villages, raping women, killing children, doing a whole lot of collateral damage that was never really part of the original remit. And the same happens in this video, because it starts from a very worthy perspective. There are people who play on human gullibility and the vulnerability of people who are grieving, and they pretend to be psychic, and they get a lot of money out of these people. These people are called confidence tricksters. Now the thing is, confidence tricksters don't only use psychic backstories to cover their tricks. They also use religious ones. You get confidence tricksters who claim to be very Christian, and they get people to invest in ludicrous schemes in Palestine or the Holy Land or something like that, and they're just fraudsters. Even more so, confidence tricksters will play on our faith in science. Every day in my junk mail inbox there are emails promising me fantastic algorithms that will make me a fortune in binary betting or something like that, or wonderful new scientifically proven remedies which will cure me of everything. Now, I don't go around saying this is a reason we should ban science. It's ridiculous. The focus, I agree, is on confidence tricksters, and something should be done about them, and we should be warned about them, but not a battle against psychics and clairvoyance. For example, there's in a 40-minute thing, there's an awful lot of talk about how cold readers get it wrong. They swap stories, other people's stories, and their own experiences. The sort of thing that Richard Dawkins says he'd egged on this clairvoyant to give him messages from his dear departed father for a while before he pointed out to the person that his father was still alive. That sort of story. You get an awful lot of those stories. Now, that doesn't stop Richard Dawkins from saying, in the middle of all this, stories only get passed around on the very rare occasions when they do get a hit. Nobody goes around telling stories of failure. Well, I've known people like that, people who could spend the whole evening swapping stories about psychics getting it wrong and still end up believing that no one ever remembers when a psychic gets it wrong, they only remember when they get it right. This ability to hold onto a belief in the face of immediate evidence to the contrary is amazing. And the other aspect of it is not just believing something in the face of evidence against it, but believing something in the face of common sense. Because of this emphasis on attacking confidence tricksters, there's a lot of emphasis on how much money clairvoyants make. Begins with Richard Dawkins talking about this very lucrative business. There's a lot more money in it, and he actually gets Derren to say, there's more money if you pretend to be something that you're not. And he says, truthful people like himself who admit that they're using tricks, pretending to read minds, don't get nearly as much money as these confidence tricksters. Now, the people they're talking about are, tarot readers and people who speak in spiritualist churches. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. He is talking to a famous television personality. Derren Brown can fill a theatre to capacity night after night for his excellent shows. And to tell me that the average clairvoyant, the spiritualist church speaker, or the tarot reader is making so much more money than Derren Brown just doesn't make sense to me. In fact, I think probably the majority of tarot readers are amateurs. It's a minority that are professionals and make money from it. And most amateurs, they would do it for friends for nothing. To suggest they're raking in the money is ludicrous. And yet, throughout this thing, we're expected to believe that. Now, this is an attack on people's ability, Richard Dawkins' ability to believe in things against all evidence and in the face of common sense. And instead of attacking that, he should be celebrating it because it's a fantastic ability. Back in 1950, all the evidence was that nobody could climb Mount Everest. And yet, Edmund Hillary believed he could in the face of all that evidence. And he did it. His team were the first people to climb Everest. And since then, it's been done by many, many other people. Back in 1903, what the Wright brothers believed they could do to make this aircraft fly was so ridiculous that they invited the scientific establishment to come along and watch, and the scientific establishment refused to come because it was just absurd what they were trying to do. And in fact, even after they'd flown, Scientific American wouldn't report on their flight because it was just absurd, it was fanciful. It took 5 years for them to be recognized. Against all common sense, they believed they could fly, and they did it. Now, I've worked for the aircraft industry, and even as late as the 70s, I could say that what made airplanes fly wasn't science. It was the sheer willpower and belief of people like Handley Page and de Havilland who founded these aircraft companies. I know there was a lot of maths and a lot of science going on, and I was a stressman working on that. But the main thrust of all that science and mathematics was not to make anything fly, it was to stop it from crashing. And that is what science is so very good at. And that is why we need science. If I go to my sort of favourite analogy of the different cultures and how you have a religious culture and it tends to be supplanted by a scientific culture, and the scientific culture tends to be supplanted by a medical culture, I would say that the religious culture, in terms of, say, learning to drive, that's the culture that tells us how to use a steering wheel. Very first thing you need to know, how to aim the car. Then the scientific culture tells us something very important, how to use the brakes, how to stop the thing going. It's only when you've learned those two things is it safe to move on to the manual cultures, when you learn how to use the accelerator. And then you can master the art of driving. So this is something that really should be celebrated. But in this video it isn't. It's denigrated. Now, I could go on and talk about why that is so. And I may do that, but it'll be in a second video because I think this one's going on, danger of going on too long. Anyway, I will conclude that I would really recommend this, this video Richard Dawkins interviewing Derren Brown if you want to know about cold reading. But be careful. It is a moral crusade, and in that sense it is misleading.